Sources, where I'll be speaking to the Village Auntie, who is a certified sexual health educator, an intimacy coach, and a relationship expert. We'll be talking about plagiarism, especially the plagiarism of Black people in Western academia and in Muslim communities. And again, hopefully for the fourth time, inshallah, we'll get it through. So we've been having some technical difficulties, but again, I'll be speaking to the Village Auntie, who is a certified sexual health educator, intimacy coach, the founder of the Village Auntie Institute. She has over 20 years of experience teaching, mentoring, and providing guidance on a range of matters from sexual intimacy, sexual health, spirituality, wellness, amongst other things. God willing, she'll be able to join. If not, I'll try it on her page, but yeah, God willing, inshallah, it will go well. But again, just for the benefit of those of you who are joining, I'll be speaking to sexual health educator and intimacy coach and a relationship expert with over 20 years of experience in various cultures.
Finally. I think
Assalamu
it worked.
alaikum.
Walaikum salam. I think it works this time.
Okay, this is really weird because I can't actually see you. Can you see me?
I can see you.
Okay, this is weird. I've never had this before, so I can only see myself. So you can see me, you said.
I can see
Let me
you
just try.
clearly.
Okay, let me just try.
Let's ask people if they can see you. Can you see both of us?
Yeah, sorry. Can people let us know if you can see both of us, please? Because I don't want it to just be my face showing because I'm the least important one out of the two of us.
No.
So if people can let us know whether you can see us, and if not, I mean, you can. So maybe it's just an issue on my phone. Okay, this is going to be strange. Okay, so everyone can see the both of us, but I'm the only one who can see myself. This is really strange. Okay, we'll carry on without it. Anyway, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well. It's Friday here, so it's always nice to lead up to the weekend. Alhamdulillah. How are you?
I'm very well. I do apologize for the delay. So I'm in Dubai. There's the what's they called? The ICARA conference.
Mhm.
I think you presented in 2020 online as well. So I think I did as well.
Yes.
So they're now having I actually thought you was going to you'll be um here, but they're having a conference. I'm giving a presentation for the men. A number of people has actually asked after you, and that's
Oh,
the reason. Another reason why I wanted to talk, because part of my presentation I'll be speaking about the intimacy period which you developed, but we can talk a little bit about that a
okay.
bit later. But a couple of the wives were actually just saying, make sure you go for it, because I did mention that will be one of the discussion points, because I touched on it. No, I mentioned you. I don't think I mentioned that intimacy period and pyramid, but I did say as part of the package that will be something that I'll be kind of touching on. So, and a number of people that have attended, I think they're listening in, because when I was having some issues to log on, I didn't realize that I needed a VPN. So I went to one of the floors and I went to another floor, the reception, and then they said that apparently in Dubai, all video calls are banned unless you have a VPN. So I had to purchase that, and then now we're here, alhamdulillah. So
Okay.
got
Alhamdulillah.
there got there in the end. But just so by way of just for the benefit of people who are listening in, newly listening, who might not be aware of your work, do you mind giving a quick high level pitch introduction to who you are and the work that you do, and then we can get into the topic at hand?
Sure. Angelica Lindsey-Ali. I'm a certified sexual and reproductive health educator. I am a marriage counselor, and a quick snapshot is I provide clinical perspectives on sexual, reproductive, and emotional health through a spiritual lens. So that's me in a nutshell.
MashaAllah. Oh, now I actually can see. Why am my face cut off? So I'm looking on the. You just see that my bottom lip look like I'm trying to copy Eddie Murphy or someone. Let me see if I can fix this. Okay, just for the benefit of, I don't think not only is a the Village Auntie a clinical profession, she's also the founder of the Village Auntie Institute. She's recognized worldwide. She has been featured in the BBC on the BBC, Vice, the New York Times, the Washington Post, as well as a number of publications over the last couple of years. Over 20 plus years of experience, cross-cultural experience, not only in the United States where she resides, but also in the Middle East and Africa and Europe. She's known as well. And someone who I respect, admire, and appreciate her work for many years. And she's also the author of a book which I don't think she publicized as much as I would like her to, because I do actually reference it quite a bit, and especially when I'm speaking to some people that I do workshops with. It's called A Passage, which is a 30-day or 31-day journal. But I'm not sure if it was directed at women, but I think men could definitely benefit from it as well. So yeah, someone that I sincerely appreciate her work, and constantly make work and prayer for her and her family. And again, as much as the work that she does not only on social media is great, I'm sure she does more work, as important work offline. But yeah, just wanted to, for the benefit of people who may not be familiar of who the Village Auntie is, she's one of few people that I really do look out for and respect highly. So just wanted to kind of add that in to supplement what you said about yourself. That being said, so this topic is something we've kind of spoken about for offline for a few years now. I don't know what's going on with my screen, because my half of my face is chopped off.
Oh, now we can see your full face. Now we see full face.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, so this topic is something that we've spoken about for a number of years, which is the issue of plagiarism. And again, mainly the issue of plagiarism of Black people, or Black educators, Black creatives, not only in Western academia, but also in Muslim spaces on social media, where I've noticed, and I want to hear your thoughts. Well, actually, first, before getting into it, do you think it's an issue, or am I exaggerating in terms of, or like, is this topic needed to talk about the plagiarism of Black intellectuals and creatives in Western academia and Muslim spaces?
100%. 100%. And it's something that I try not to focus a lot of attention on, because I think that I believe was it Toni Morrison who said the purpose of racism is distraction. So I think the purpose of these types of things is distraction. And I think it's worth talking about, because when you say racism or anti-Blackness, those are very big words. And you'll have people who will say, I'm not anti-Black, I'm not racist, I would never do that. But there are nefarious ways that implicit bias shows up, especially in social media spaces, with the theft of Black creative content, Black intellectual contributions, where they are not credited. People, commit theft and call it inspiration. So I definitely think that there is a space and a necessity to have this conversation.
Wow. Can I pick up on the point you mentioned about people stealing intellectual property but calling it inspiration?
Mm-hmm.
Playing, I don't want to call it devil's advocate, playing angel's advocate. What about those who think that they genuinely are, like, they've seen something, maybe they've seen your work, they've maybe just rehashed it or said it in a way that maybe they would say it to their audiences?
Mm-hmm.
Is that intellectual theft? Is that plagiarism? Or is that like they've been inspired by someone's work? How do you define the line, or where do you draw the line between the two?
So I think that's a great question, because I have a lot of students who have come to my workshops, who, are my longtime students, who will, talk about things that are within my realm of expertise. And I think the difference between inspiration and theft is when you try to market something or put something off as if it's your own original idea without any form of attribution. And if you're doing that without any contextual knowledge. So if you hear me say something on an Instagram live and that suddenly becomes your post 24 or 48 hours later, and then you're not able to back that up with any kind of evidence or any kind of explanation, if people ask you questions and comments, then that veers into, you're not inspired, you just stole that idea, and now you're caught out there because you don't really fully understand it. I take inspiration from so many people. I take a lot of inspiration from you, right? Anytime I talk about Kunyaza, I never talk about it without mentioning the name Habiba Kande. And I say that because you're a person that I look up to, you're my friend, you are a guiding force in this field. So I have to say that. Now, I also am a Kunyaza educator, right? I teach people Kunyaza. I don't technically have to say your name, but that is a part of respecting the work that has been done ahead of time. I'm never going to talk about Kunyaza without talking about you. So that's where it gets a little bit muddy. And when things look too similar and there is no credit and no attribution at all, and it happens, like if it happens one time, that's one thing. But when people have built whole businesses and platforms on, let me see what you're going to do so that I can copy it, then it becomes something that should be addressed, I think.
Mm, mm. And I don't know. I mean, this is something that I'm not surprised by. I mean, we did speak about this even like 2 or 3 years, even more than that, actually. Maybe I think it was even before the pandemic, where we both noticed that there was I think it was coined there's going to be little village aunties. And
Mhm.
again, there's a fine line between someone obviously being your student or someone genuinely being inspired by your work and then maybe in their own way or their own style. But I think one of the dangers, I think, like you rightly pointed out, is when people are falsely claiming something which is not theirs, and especially speaking about a topic where they haven't maybe got the experience or the qualifications and expertise to speak about that issue, especially when you're dealing with human beings, especially when we're speaking about relationships. And it's easy to kind of like, okay, hear something and then regurgitate what you've heard. But then when the person now sees you as that expert, that go-to person, but you've only got the sound bites of maybe what you've heard of someone, and even maybe the advice that someone has given that you've heard, that might be specific for that particular individual. And then you might copy and paste that, not real, and you're actually doing a disservice, not realizing the advice that you heard that might be for that particular person, that particular context. But because you've just listened to, oh, that's a device that someone you respect has provided, you're going to give it to someone else in the total different context, and actually you could do more harm than good. And it's an issue that I've also seen with like people who give like religious rulings, like fiqh rulings as well, where they will read something from the past, not understanding the context of why that fatwa came to be, and then just pass it on not only to any individual that they meet, but also like globally kind of thing.
Mhm.
Like on,
Mhm.
and that's definitely a problem. Now, obviously, we've identified this as a problem. Where you have, again, not only maybe from personal experience, but maybe advice to anyone who's going through this, what advice would you give to someone who's noticing that their IP has been misused or abused? What advice would you give to such an individual?
The first advice I would give is to understand that it's going to happen and that the most creative minds amongst us, regardless of their racial, ethnic, or religious background, the best amongst us are copied, right? People copy, fabulous people every day. So it's going to come. The second thing is try not to engage in one-to-one debate in the comment section underneath the work that you're doing. Stand behind your work and try not to get too involved. If it's someone that you have a personal relationship with, definitely feel free to pull their coat and say, Assalamu alaikum. Hey, what's up? I've noticed that you've been talking about XYZ. I know that this is something that I have taught about before. Would it be possible for you the next time that you talk about this thing to make sure that you mention, the source that you got it from? And when I say that to people, people will say, well, oh, that sounds confrontational. But if this is a person that you have a relationship with, whether it is a student teacher relationship, a friendly relationship, even if it's just an online relationship, those are also real relationships. If that is a person that you cannot address this with, you need to reconsider how firm your relationship is with that person. I've done that, and it has, in one instance it did not go very well and the person continued to steal, right? In one instance it actually went very well and the person apologized and was like, I'm so sorry, I got caught up, I was being advised by such and such to do XYZ. But at the end of the day, I think it is important for people to do your work, not for likes, not for followers, not for the algorithm. You know, Habib, I did this work for almost 20 years before I got on social media. And 99% of the work that I do is still offline. I could care less about follower counts. I could care less about what have you. I want people to know that I exist and that I have information to share. That is what differentiates a lot of people who are true creatives versus people who are hopping on whatever the next trend is. The scary part about it is there are so many of us who burn out and just leave a platform, right? We burn out and we leave because it feels as if someone is literally just waiting for you to do something so that they can hop on it. Right, they're waiting for you to do something so that they can try to monetize it, and that's not really not what it's about, especially when it comes to something as serious as sexual and reproductive health. You and I both know that Muslims need a lot of education in these fields. And sure, your prediction was true. You're like, you're going to have the village auntie, the village cousin, the village this, the village that, right? And now here we are 5 years later. Alhamdulillah, village auntie is trademarked, so nobody can like effectively use that. But you do see now so many more Muslim women in hijab who are talking about sex, who are talking about pleasure, who are talking about things like vaginismus, who are talking about reproductive health. And it's good because they are finding their niche and they're sticking to it. The challenge is when you have people who try to be literally a carbon copy of someone else, after a while, it's just exhausting and boring.
Yeah, I know. I think no, I agree with everything which you said. I think one of the things how I try to, because I'll be honest, there's sometimes when I've seen someone like steal my work, I used to get really upset and angry about it, but then it got to a point where I just think I'm consuming so much energy trying to fight fires, so to speak, or trying to like claim what I believe is rightfully mine, but then I then won't have the time to kind of do other things that which are maybe more value add. And it just again like, and a lot of people, even when some people you confront, they might be obviously be quite defensive. Some people are genuinely, think that they haven't done anything wrong. Others, they probably are aware, but they just want obviously to hide behind, because again, I just think it can be quite confrontational. People can be quite defensive. But on the other side, I've also had it where people have accused me of plagiarism. So that's why I wanted to, and I'm glad how you spoke about the difference between inspiration and theft. And I had it with, and I think I mentioned this before, but with my first book, and I actually credited the person. So I credited this particular individual, but I said I didn't agree with his conclusion, which he reached about, because he said something along the lines of all of the original Arabs were black, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was also a black, will be considered to be a black man as well. And I didn't, although whilst I acknowledge that yes, a lot of the early Arabs were brown and dark in complexion, but then I didn't agree with his conclusion that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was black. But I didn't ridicule him or anything like that. But when I started again, that was my first book. This is like 10 years ago, and I started doing some talks about it. And my book probably was more popular or known than his book. I don't know if it was envy or jealousy, but then he then started to say that I stole his idea. I wrote my book because I read his book, and then I wanted to write like a similar book. And he even had a couple of people, some of his friends, visited the mosque where I was giving talks, and was like raising the kind of some questions, trying to kind of catch me out. So, and then we spoke offline. And the only reason I'm saying that is because he wasn't the first book I read about the topic, but he was one of many. And I thought I did the right thing by crediting him, and I was somewhat inspired by what he did. But again, I didn't agree with all of his conclusions. But some people, again, what one considered to be a sort of inspiration, another person can see as theft, because this person might be more successful than they are. And obviously, we are human beings. Jealousy can come into play. And that's why I wanted you to explain, which you did correctly. I thought was a great explanation of the difference between inspiration and theft, because I don't want people to feel that you cannot cite someone. So obviously we're all inspired by different people. But I think it's just part of, I'll call it etiquette, if anything. Maybe because we're both understand from an academic background, so you understand if you're writing something, like if you're writing a paper, you have to cite your sources. That's or else
Mhm.
you're going to fail. But then I'm trying to think for someone who maybe they haven't come from that background, they might not think it's like ethical or it's even Islamically, but they might not think that it's a form of theft. Because I know once I think it's changed somewhat, but I know especially 5, 10 years ago, or no more than that, maybe 15 years ago, it was very common for Muslim books, Islamic books, people to buy it. They'll just photocopy it and they'll just upload it. And they
Mhm.
looked at it as if because knowledge is beneficial, it's Islamic knowledge, you can't monetize it. And
Mhm.
they didn't even appreciate that someone's is their time, the effort, even the cost to print this. They don't a lot of, and that's something that I noticed a lot in Muslim communities, even the so-called like very religious communities. They didn't respect intellectual property. They didn't respect copyright laws and things like that. And they saw it as Islamically is completely, permissible to do such things. So um, yes, that's what I try and see from where some people are coming from, but there are also some people who are, I'm not going to lie, who are clearly stealing,
Mhm.
and especially if it's like what you mentioned, they've seen a post and then they literally regurgitate or say something similar within 24 hours or a week. That's definitely something that should be called out. But why do you think people are doing that? So those people who are stealing, why do you think they're doing that?
Ooh, that's a big question. I do want to comment though, really
Oh,
quickly.
sorry, go on,
So you
please. Yeah.
you and I both come from academic spaces, so we understand the importance of citing sources, right? Citation is a big part of academic writing, but Islamically, it's also a part of our tradition because what are hadith? Hadith are citations from credible human beings who have witnessed something that was done by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How do we grade a hadith? We grade a hadith based on the source of the citation. So this hadith is weak because this person is what have you, right? So we cannot say as Muslims that we don't know what it means to cite. And even when you engage in religious fisticuff, as people like to do, right? And they say, well, bring me your dalil is what? Your citation, your evidence. Your evidence is based on citing sources. So it is not, outside of the realm of existence. Someone can't say, well, I never went to university, so I don't know anything about citing. Okay. And people will even ask you, is that Quran or is it Hadith? Is that Sahih Muslim or is it Sahih Bukhari? Oh, this is fiqh. Is it Hanafi? Is it Hanbali? Is it Shafi? Is it Maliki? So this tradition of citation is a part of our spiritual heritage as well. I think that people find it they find it okay to steal from black
Point.
people
Sorry, I'm
because
just taking it in. That's a great point. I kind of totally forgot about that because I was mainly looking at it from the academic side. But that's a great point. No, honestly, sorry.
I
Continue,
mean,
please.
but it literally is. People will say that. I teach fiqh, and this is one of the reasons why I don't really like to discuss fiqh publicly online. Because if you ask me, oh, Angelica, where did you get the evidence for this particular thing that you said was okay for us to do in Maliki fiqh? I have to take you back to the Muwatta. I have to take you back to this source and this source. So citation is a huge part of our dean, and I'm glad it just came to me as you were talking. I was like, wait a minute, this is
Yeah.
this is what we do. But I think people find it okay to steal from black people in general. One, because anti-blackness is ingrained in so many of our cultures, and because black people for years have been a breadbasket for people to feed from for all things cultural, intellectual, spiritual, aesthetic, and otherwise. It is seen as okay to steal from black people because many times we are not empowered in spaces to defend ourselves. And for many, 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 many centuries, right, we have been marginalized into spaces where we do not have greater access. Anti-blackness is something that appears in overt ways, right? I don't want you to marry my daughter because you're from Nigeria, right? But anti-blackness also rears itself in other ways. Oh, I see Sister Angelica talking about orgasms. I also can talk about orgasms. Yes, I know that she's already dealt with the death threats and the rape threats and people telling her that she's not a good Muslim. But me, I look like a good Muslim. So I get to talk about it because I am Arab, because I am Southeast Asian, because I am someone who's more palatable to the larger Muslim community. This is not to say that these people themselves are anti-black, but they are benefiting from a system system that seeks to marginalize Black people. And that is part of the conversation that I have on my page a lot, is look at how you are benefiting from the privilege of not being the subject of anti-Blackness. So it's not about white privilege, right? We can all be demonized by white privilege, which also demonizes white people too, but that's a whole other conversation. But when we take part in spaces that continue to marginalize and capitalize on Black thought without crediting Black thought, we have to interrupt that and interrogate it. So it's easy. It's like, oh, Black people did it, so it's easy for me to steal it, like, right? It's easy for me to, nobody's going to pay attention to that page, but somebody will pay attention to this page. There were, I've noticed in recent years, very strict religious conferences in the United States that would never talk about sex are now inviting people to talk about sex. And I'm looking at the people that they're inviting to talk about sex, and I'm like, I don't think they know what they're talking about, but they're palatable, right? So you can't bring a loud Black woman from Detroit in a hijab, right, to talk about sex, even though she's the expert. But let's bring this version that is going to be more accepting to the community. So that's why I think it's okay. I think it's okay. I think that is also why this is veering out of the academic space into another space. I think that is also why we see, in America in particular, why we see the face of covered Muslim women. Black women are rarely included, but historically, Black women were the first women to wear hijab and khimar regularly on the streets of America. Yet we are often excluded from that conversation. That's just one example, right? We see it in so many spaces. Why is Adele so famous as a singer? Yes, Adele can sing, but so can Jasmine Sullivan. Like, why is she not more popular? So it happens. I'm just saying that it happens in so many different spaces, that you have to be able to see the trend. And once you see the trend, you know that it's not just you. Because when you're a person who gets things stolen from you a lot, you can start to feel like, well, am I doing something wrong? Right? Is it me? Am I not protecting my intellectual property? When you realize that it is a system that is designed to keep you distracted and marginalized, you begin to move differently. So that's that on that. I talk a lot. How do you?
No, it's a lot. I'm digesting what you said. There's a lot that could be unpacked from that. Sticking to the topic, obviously, especially in relation to what you mentioned within Muslim communities, I wanted to talk more about that. So for those who are, like you said, because I've noticed, like, again, a few years ago, people wasn't speaking about sex, and now all of a sudden the people who are the recognized authorities in mainstream America, mainstream Muslim communities in America as well as in the UK, are someone who's maybe read a book or attended like a week's course, and all of a sudden now they become the authority.
They
So I'm just
attended
trying to understand.
one of our courses.
Yeah, no, literally, that's happened on a number of occasions, and I've always recognized that will kind of be the case. And that's what I'm more comfortable to put my ideas or what I've learned or researched to paper, because I know that in a number of spaces, especially I think in the US, people are a bit more welcoming. I'm sorry, non-Black Muslims, but especially in the UK, you need to have a certain look. I mean, if you come, I've got a struggle beard. Sometimes I'll grow my hair, so you need to have a look a certain way, and otherwise you're not even going to be recognized. So because I know, understand, and for me, I'm looking okay, like to get the message across. I would again prefer to put it in writing, and whoever obviously wants to pick up and speak about it, and if they've got a face that's more palatable for those masses outside of the Black community, then by all means, because again, I can't force someone to take what I'm saying, because I don't look what they expect of someone who's got a bit of knowledge or whatever. Whereas I'm sometimes also troubled by the response by some Black people, where I'll be putting something out and then I'm expecting Black people, whether they're from West Africa, East Africa, America, what have you, to kind of acknowledge and appreciate, but it's like they need a Eurocentric or Arab or South Asian face for them to kind of appreciate the knowledge that you're imparting. And there's a time and place, obviously, to be humble and things like that, but also a time and place to recognize where you have expertise. And I'm using the word expertise intentionally, because I think sometimes as not only as Muslims but as Black people as well, we kind of um, bend over backwards and with the whole humility thing, act if we don't know anything. But they're in certain fields we do know what we're talking about, and I don't think we should be ashamed or discouraged from claiming and owning that yes, we are knowledgeable in certain matters, or an expert in certain matters, because you find some people who have literally very limited experience. Either they themselves or other people will kind of give themselves that platform. So if people aren't going to give us that platform, then I think there's more onus on us as Black people ourselves, especially Black Muslims, to again self promote or let people know what you've done. Again, without obviously being arrogant and things like that. But people sometimes will kind of try and use that against you to be like, you're arrogant, you think you know all this and the other. But no, if people aren't going to prop you up, you need to kind of prop yourself up. Or if you see others, so that's why I try to make and I don't because some people ask me why is it I'm always mentioning your work. It's not because you're a Black woman or because you're a Muslim woman. That's part of it, but I appreciate the work that you put out, and I appreciate it just as much as any other intimacy expert or thought leader, whether it's, and I've mentioned this before, whether it's the Esther Perels of this world, the Holly Richmonds of this world, and others. I'd put it on the same level, if not higher, because you have that educational background and the cross-cultural experience, the clinical experience and knowledge, as well as the ethical and the spiritual element, which you don't generally find in Western academia. So I think it's important that, and again, I'm especially speaking to Black people, Black men in particular, not to be afraid to vocalize people that you've been inspired or that you've heard from or you learned from, for other people to kind of know. Because for some reason, we're very comfortable to kind of shout the voices of other people that we might have, been inspired by, whether it's the five love languages, whether it's the Tony Robbins, with all these other inspirational speakers or intellectuals or Jeff Bezos and all that. But when I'm thinking, okay, how many Black people can you, as intellectual leaders, thought leaders, do you speak about other than rappers? I'm talking about the men here in particular. Is they're not so forthcoming? So that's something that I'm quite troubled by with the Black men in particular, because you've got no excuse.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand maybe not I can understand. I'll give you I can somewhat understand from other communities because they've been raised in a way they don't think Black people are of the same level. That's their issue. But for Black people ourselves to have that not only inferiority complex, but you want to prop up other people when you've got other people in your own community. Because I always get irritated when I hear people, especially Black people, just saying, "Oh, there isn't any Black people that are doing anything." It's like, no, there are many, but maybe you haven't opened your eyes, or you haven't seen, or you haven't acknowledged them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So sorry if I went on a bit of a rant, but I just kind of wanted to add that to supplement the points that you was making. But in addition to what I said, what advice would you give to um, Black people, Black Muslims in particular, that we could do better? And then also, if it differs from like non-Black people, like South Asians, Arabs, what could they do to kind of acknowledge um, Black sources, and Black intellectuals like and creatives like yourself?
I think it's just as simple as being honest. Like, name it. Like, name the person. And one thing that I like to do is I like to model that. I'm not going to say you should do this thing, and I'm not going to do it. So you'll hear me when I talk about, anytime someone says, well, what's a book that I should get if I want to learn about sexual health? I don't care what the person's religion is. The first name out of my mouth is going to be Habiba Kande, A Taste of Honey, Kunyaza, Women of Desire. Like, these are books that you should get. I think it's important for us to be honest, right? It's to be honest. And so I'm gonna practice what I'm preaching, and I'm gonna say that. And I appreciate you mentioning me in the company of people like Dr. Holly Richmond and Esther Perel. These are people that I look up to. These are names that I have mentioned before. Dr. Lauren Fogelmercy, Emily Nagoski. These are people who are non-Black people, non-Muslim people who I've mentioned. But I also have to say that there are Black women who are not Muslim, who are in the academic space, who are in the clinical space, who have embraced me as one of their own. Habib, you know better than anybody that I am not on the big myself up train. It is only because of you. You're like, Angelica, you need to call yourself an expert. You need to call yourself this. You were the first person who told me to do that. And it wasn't until this summer in June that really started to crystallize for me in a real way, when I went to the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists Conference, the ASECT conference. It's a very prestigious conference for people who are involved in sexual health. And it was Shadeen Francis, licensed marriage and family therapist. We were on a panel together, and she was the one when I was like, should I apply? I think I posted in my story, like, should I submit an abstract, knowing good and well that I did not have enough confidence to submit an abstract. And she sent me a DM like, yes, in fact, you should. And I'm like, but I'm not as good as this, or I'm not as whatever. And she's like, and you should do it. When I got to the conference, I expected to be like in a smaller breakout room. And I don't know why I was there. I'm not going to say it was because of anything, but I presented in the main hall as a breakout room. So I'm on this big stage in front of all of these people, and I'm giving my presentation, and afterwards I was just engulfed in arms and locks and froze and braids and shea butter and cocoa butter and all of the things that smell delicious. There was just Black women waiting to just pull me into hugs and embraces. And it was doctor this and therapist so and so and this person and that person. And it made me know that I have a right to be there. So these are women who, in subsequent months since that conference, I have seen them mention my name in their spaces. So I know that it's something that can be done. I'm not attached to an institution. I don't have a PhD. I'm not a licensed marriage therapist. Yes, I have multiple certifications. Yes, I've been doing this work for a very long time. But it's as simple as saying people's names. So I'm going to say some names of women who have profiles that I think that you all should follow. These are Black sexuality health educators. Shadeen Francis, Dr. Lex Brown James, who's known as Lex Sex Doc on Instagram. Dr. Shamika Thorpe, she's Dr. Shamika on Instagram. Dr. Tanya M. Bass, she's Dr. Tanya M. Bass on Instagram. Dr. Deshauna Avant Johnson, she is the Intimacy Seminars on Instagram. You have Dr. Janelle Howe, who is the vagina rehab doctor. You have Dr. James Wadley, who I always forget his Instagram handle, but you can look him up. There is my research partner, Dr. Alyssa Robillard. I don't think she's on Instagram. These are people that I have talked to, I have seen in person. Some of them are people I have worked with. They are people who have read my abstract proposals. I could get up here and I could act like I'm not influenced or inspired by anyone, but that would be a lie. That would be a lie. So I think modeling, it's okay to say who your teacher is. It's okay to say who you are inspired by. That is the lesson that I think that Black people and non-Black people also can take to heart. And it's part of a decolonization of thought for me to be able to mention my name in the same company as these other people, right? Everybody has a teacher. Everybody has somebody that they've learned from. Everybody has somebody that they're inspired by. It's a part of this clout chasing culture where it feels like I don't have to chase clout. I don't have to mention this person's name. It's not clout chasing, it's appreciation. That's what I think is very important. And we do it in religious spaces, we can do it in non-religious spaces. And so that would be my biggest advice. Just be honest, acknowledge your teachers, because that's also how people know if you really know what you're talking about. I always tell people, ask me who my teachers are. Ask me who my people are. Ask people who know me if I'm really that person, because you can know a person by the people that they take knowledge from. So I think it's also a way to give a level of validation to the work that you do, because you are showing gratitude. You're also showing the chain of transmission of where you got your information from. And that is very Islamic. And I think that's something that we can take to heart.
100%. I agree with that. I love the colonization of thought. That hit really well. No, that's very very well said. And like, I'm just thinking about even what you mentioned, because again, I don't know, maybe because I'm thinking so much about the arguments from a Western academic perspective and how you brought it in, spoken about within our like religious tradition in terms of the transmissions and like the hadith and citing sources is part of our tradition. I didn't really think about it like that. So I'm glad
White people
I'm
do it
thinking
though,
about it.
Habib. But don't white people
Sorry?
do that all the time? Don't white people do that? White people call out their chain of transmission all the time. They say Socrates said, they say Aristotle said, they
Yeah.
say Sigmund Freud said. Don't they do that? They will
Yes,
always
and that's something, and that's going to kind of, I wanted to talk about that, and that's going to tie into something that I've noticed, which I don't think many Muslims are as aware. So even, for example, in Muslim spaces, or especially if you're obviously speaking to, committed, conscious Muslims, religious Muslims, generally speaking, of, other than of course mentioning the Quran or Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they would, if you're going to, in order to convince someone about maybe a particular opinion or stance on something, they will want to hear, okay, which particular scholar said this. And what I've noticed is that one particular scholar who, amongst a number of Muslims, like Sunni Muslims, he's marginalized and his contribution is not really recognized, is a 9th century scholar called Al-Jahid. And he was a scholar who inspired a number of the Arab and Persian scholars to speak about anti-black racism. He was a scholar that a number of the later scholars were inspired by to speak about erotology. But he doesn't get the credit that he deserves. And I'm not saying it's just because of he was black. So he was a although he was born and bred in Iraq, he was of West African, East African, sorry, heritage. And even the way some of the later scholars will describe him, they will say that, like he was an ugly man. And even with that, I think, okay, was he ugly because he didn't fit the convention of what it means to be attractive in Iraq? Do you understand what I mean? So like maybe when they said he had a big nose and his eyes were bulging, again, is that was because he didn't have the aesthetic appearance that they deemed, because again, that's when we're talking about beauty, it's all relative as well, and it depends on the culture of the people. And it was something that in one of his treaties that he spoke about, like the beauties of black women and why and how, for example, a number of the Muslims, and this was again about two to 300 years after the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was speaking about how the changes of the Muslims had changed to the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, where there was a lot of intermarriage between blacks and Arabs and things like that. Whereas in his period, he was noticing how a lot of the Muslims, a lot of the religious Muslims, were showing a disdain towards black women. And that's one of the reasons why he wrote his particular book. And he also mentioned about the disdain that was shown amongst religious circles as well towards divorced women. And then he was speaking about how during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, this wasn't an issue. Whereas nowadays, and again, he was speaking, like I've mentioned, in the 9th century or the 3rd century of the Hijrah, of how attitudes has changed. And then there were people who were, and he was speaking about the religious elite. It's not like he was speaking about ignorant people. And I think it's something that we as Muslims need to be aware of when we're looking at our history, to know that yes, we respect our scholars, but they're also individuals and products of their environment. And you do see elements of, not even elements, you do see anti-black sentiment in some texts. You do see anti-women interpretations in some of our texts. And it's important that people understand that, because just because a particular scholar said something, it doesn't mean that necessarily reflects what Allah and his messenger have said. But this is an interpretation. So it's important, and he was someone that was speaking against a number of these injustices that was done in the Muslim community. Because I think as Muslims, I don't know, maybe because sometimes we're quite defensive or we want to protect the religion, that we will deny that there is anti-black racism. We will deny that there is domestic violence or there's oppression towards women in the name of the religion, because we think, or we don't want maybe non-Muslims to use it against Islam. So we act like it doesn't exist. But there is a lot of that in our history, in some of our texts, and some scholars were influenced by that. And we have to be quite brave in addressing that. But one of, like I said, the few scholars, or one of the first, who spoke out against that was a black Muslim scholar. That later scholars like Ibn al-Jawzi and Ibn Jalaluddin as-Suyuti, some after scholars even said they plagiarized some of his works, because Al-Jahid, he was again one of the earliest scholars. He came across the works of Aristotle, Socrates, and what have you, but he wanted to put his own spin on it. And some of the stuff that he said was quite controversial for his time. But it was interesting that, like I said, a number of the later scholars that were inspired by his work, and then they started writing books about anti-black racism and how, Islam is not a racist religion, X, Y, and Z. Some of them they cited him, others they didn't. But you can clearly see some of the scholars literally just copied so many passages from his work into their works. But if I were to mention, for example, Al-Jahid to a number of Muslims, they wouldn't recognize who he is. So that's why I would have to say a non-black Muslim scholar that is probably known to them, for them to take the knowledge or what that person said. So that's something, again, that I kind of battle with, because it's like sometimes I do want to say who this person is, but again, a lot of people, they don't even recognize who he was as an authority. They need to hear someone that they kind of recognize and respect, and then they'll take from him. But a number of, like I said, of the later scholars, such as Ibn Taymiyyah, they read Al-Jahid's work, and were inspired by a number of his contributions. But it's only a few scholars that we kind of take from, because they're the ones that maybe are popularized, or the masses kind of really. So I'm saying, in that type of situation, how what do you think could be done to kind of help black and non-black Muslims understand the appreciation, I mean, understand the intellectual contribution of our black scholars, both male and female alike?
Mm, mm. That's a big one. I think
Or have you noticed it? Maybe I'm just going off, maybe it's something that I've noticed. I'm just
no, it's
because this
true.
is something.
I,
Yeah.
it's true, and I think we don't value Black people and women's knowledge the same as everybody else's. We have to think that somehow it's deficient in some way. Somehow it's deficient in some way. Malcolm X spoke about it. James Baldwin spoke about it. Toni Morrison spoke about it. It is so you can talk about this great scholar of Black origin. You can talk about Black Sahaba, and someone is always going to find something to pinpoint why it is less than. There are some people, if you say anything about Ibn Taymiyyah, they want to fight you. They like let's we gonna fight, because we almost we commit, and I say we as Muslims, we almost commit a minor shirk when we elevate the scholars almost to the level of like you can't say anything about them, right? Because this is a scholar, as if scholars are not human beings, as if scholars are the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as if scholars somehow have to be put up on a pedestal. So if I have almost deified billah scholars, how dare I put a Black man up there? I ain't gonna put a Black man in the space, like, because scholars are like untouchable. So how can you tell me that this Black person is also untouchable? It has to do with deep interrogation of unconscious bias that exists, because I don't think it's always intentional. I think that these things are kept from us, just like the fact that Muslims started the whole field of erotology is kept from us as Muslims. The ahadith, the numerous ahadith about the way that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam expressed physical intimacy with his wives, not sexual, right? But all of the ahadith that talk about the way that he encouraged love and care, that is also hidden from us. This is also hidden from us. The fact that there were Black scholars in the 9th century. You say that to some Black Muslims nowadays, and they'll be like, it wasn't no Black scholars in the 9th century. It's like, of course there were, right? So I think it comes down to just in many ways, Black people are still fighting to be seen as human. We're still fighting to be seen as having value. We're still fighting to be seen. We're still just fighting to be seen, period, and to be recognized. So I don't know what it would be to unravel that. What I can say, because I do, have a study circle called the Sankore Circle, where we talk about the African intellectual legacy in Islam. When people are introduced to scholars and to Sahaba and to these great people, they will say, SubhanAllah, I never knew. And then they start to want to learn more. So I think talking about al-Jahids, talking about these people's names will make people, well, let me go look it up. Let me go find this out. I think that is really the only thing that we can do, because we'd have to undo like centuries of miseducation in Muslim spaces.
Yeah. And do you find, like, with women, and again, this is not only black women but women in general, do you find this a similar, like, pushback, where where their intellectual contributions are not as respected as maybe they should be, and why is that? Or is it mainly
Habib, I can
amongst black people?
I can tell you, you can post stuff. You, Habib Akande, can post things on your page, and people will be like, "Oh, yes, Habib, right?" I can post the same exact thing, and people will be ready to excommunicate me from communities. And that has nothing to do with you. That has everything to do with perception. So yes, it happens to women too. The fact that when we talk about fiqh, when we talk about Imam Malik, who did he learn fiqh from? right? Who founded, these Islamic institutions? Who founded universities? Who founded these places? Someone told me that a woman cannot be a scholar in fiqh, and I said, how? Why? Someone told me that a woman cannot teach a man how to read Quran. I said, ask most men where they learn how to recite Al-Fatiha. They learned it from their mother's lap. So yes, there's an intellectual erasure of women of all ethnicities and nationalities, not just in Muslim spaces, but just in spaces across the board. I always tell people that if I were a man, I would be a lot more popular and a lot more successful, because the things that I say would not be disputed as much, because they're seen as being more valid because they come from a male lens.
You mentioned it's perception, which I do agree with. Like if I suppose something, if you use, it would, and that's actually crazy that, and I do believe that will be the case. That unfortunately there'll be some people, say vile things, or even would go as far as to excommunicate you for, for something, that a man can post and no one will bat an eyelid. Especially amongst those who were like religious or even like, knowledgeable, who still have hold these views. Where is that come from? Because that's something that I'm trying to understand. Because we have examples in our tradition going back to the time of the companions where you had women not only teaching their sons but teaching men as well. So this idea that like women should be just secluded, or the only role is to be a mother or to fulfill the desires of their husband. If you actually look again, and this is maybe because people are reading certain hadiths or certain statements not in the proper context, but if you look at the lives of the early Muslims, you didn't have that in their society. You had women challenging men, not only like our mother Aisha, where she would hear a hadith and she'd be like, no, that's incorrect. The Prophet didn't mean that, or didn't say that straight away, because, or explaining to Abu Huraira, um, the famous hadith when he said that there's no good in three things: women, dogs, I think horses was the other. And straight away, just by, he said, A, that the Prophet ﷺ didn't say it in that context. He was quoting, that's what the Jews believe, and she corrected her. So, there's things that you hear straight away that's either wrong or you haven't understood the context. And we had this until we had dynamic female voices that were even correcting men. So it wasn't just they're only allowed to correct men if they are their mother, if they're their mothers or the wives, but it's behind a veil where no one can see them. How I'm just not trying to say, how did we get to the point where now that women's role is just, and again I'm speaking amongst the so-called like religious circles, where that is the only place for a woman. It's just really to be like to birth children or to be the wife of her husband, but again complete isolation from community. Where do you think that came from, like that idea?
I think it comes from people prioritizing culture over religion, um, borrowing bastardized and misinformed concepts from other religions and infusing them into Islam. So adopting Judeo-Christian supposed, because these are also not Judeo-Christian beliefs, into Islam, Hindu beliefs into Islam, the whole concept of purdah, that's not from Islam, that a woman has to stay in the home. But it also, at the root of it, it comes down to a free woman can't be controlled. A woman who is able to dispute what I say cannot be controlled. And if she cannot be controlled, then I cannot be empowered. And I have to have all of the power. I have to have all of the power. It's a misunderstanding of the role of women. It's a complete erasure. They have redacted certain parts of the faith. They've redacted certain parts of Islamic history to suit a narrative that says that women should just be homemakers, women should just be wives, women should not aspire to do anything else. It is this idea that we can only be one thing, as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create us to be a multitude of things within that one thing. It's very much rooted in a lack of proper Islamic education in the Sunday schools. And I say this, my daughter just came home 2 weeks ago and said our imam, who is from Ghana, said that women should not work outside of the home. And if women work outside of the home, the only thing that they should be are teachers and nurses. And I said to my daughter, this is in September of 2023. They said this to my 15-year-old daughter. And me and her father had to give her hadith after hadith after hadith, Quranic verse, take her to the last sermon of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to explain why this is wrong. But that is what works for him and his mentality, but that's not Islam. So you have people on both ends, people who want to have a super liberal version of Islam and people who want to have a super conservative version of Islam, but we know that Islam is what? It's the middle path. So how can you erase the contributions of, even if you just take one Muslim woman, Aisha radiallahu anha, the majority of the authentic ahadith that we get come from who? They come from her. So how can we disregard it? So I think it comes from, people wanting to have control because they don't feel like they have control over themselves. It comes from a miseducation when it comes to religion and a lack of people reading. We learn our deen through other people's mouths rather than reading it for ourselves. And that is not Islamic at all. This is why we don't have intermediaries. You don't have to go through the imam, right? There are certain things that you can seek out knowledge, and we just refuse to do so. And social media has made it even worse because if you put some halal humming in the background and you get a dude with a big enough beard, you can say anything and people will think that's Islam. They will think that's Islam. I've had people come in my inbox, people that I know personally, who have said, Sister Angelica, I don't think that you should have interviews with Habib. And I said, why should I not have interviews with Habib? They said, because the optics just don't look right. He's black, you're black. We never see your husband. We don't even know if Habib is married. Y'all shouldn't be getting on Instagram talking about sex. I said, first of all, do we get on Instagram and talk about sex? Or do we get on Instagram and talk about our profession? Second of all,
Exactly.
I talk to men every day. I talk to men at work. I supervise men at work. Am I not supposed to talk to them as well? Well, no, it just doesn't look good. So that's how far we have descended in our concept of decency and decorum. It's two professionals who are literally thousands of miles away from each other. When she said that, I was ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But this is how far we have devolved as a community where we feel as if we can't even engage in conscious, competent, halal, wholesome conversation. Somehow it has to be sexualized. It's a big problem. It's a big problem.
Yeah, I I don't get that. Well, some people years ago, I used to get those type of messages, but not as much anymore. Maybe because some of the response I used to give up, maybe people think I'm not maybe going to listen to them. So I did have a few years ago when someone, and again, I don't know, maybe because people think, some people, I think they're coming from a good place,
Mhm.
and some people will project maybe if they're uncomfortable with something, which again, and I always say that my work is not for everyone. And that's why I try and provide different sources and things like that, especially like with books, because you can digest that. Not everyone's comfortable to see content of a man and a woman speaking. I don't know, maybe they think people's going to jump out of the screen and, like, it's just, like, I don't even know where people's minds are at. And I just think sometimes people, I think it's some of it, if I'm honest, I think it's performance piety. I don't, because they won't act like that when they are in working with non-Muslims. Even in environments where they will have khalwa sometimes, they will be secluded with someone of the opposite sex. So this idea that, but when it comes to anyone who is like Muslim, then they have this extra, I don't know, I just, because again, it's just not practical and it's not feasible, especially if you're living in the West. I can understand if you're living in a completely segregated society, in some parts of the world, I can understand that. But for most people, again, who listen are from multicultural, cosmopolitan cities where you are going to have gender interaction and things like that to act like, and again, as adults, and that's why I intentionally don't speak to anyone under the age of 18, just because it's just younger. It's more difficult and hormones all over the place. So the way you can maybe converse and speak to someone, or you understand, or you expect an adult to have some understanding in terms of what is right and wrong, even for them, because everyone has got their own limits. So it's not about infantilizing audiences. But I just find sometimes with people, I'll use the word religious sparingly. They will use the religion when it suits. Again, I same as said, I won't even call it religious because it's like, again, like I said, it's a bit performative. Where the men sometimes be acting like, oh, I can't look at this sister. And you be watching Marvel films where women are half naked and all of these romance
Or
novels.
in these
I don't
Instagram
know.
models DMs.
Oh yes, I just don't get it as like the hypocrisy. It's just like and then that's what I don't really understand where it's coming from. But again, some of it I just think is quite performative, or they have their own maybe because they can't deal with something. If they're in that position, So I do get some brothers who will message me, and because they'll be like, oh, if they were speaking to X amount of these women, they'll be sleeping with all of them. I'm just like, oh, this you have the same mindset. I know some people are very weak that way. If that's the case, then for you, maybe you shouldn't put yourself in that position. But to make it out as if everyone has that level of weakness, I would say, that's not the case. So I do find it quite. And then sometimes, and I think it's important, especially as professionals or educators, that one is, and like when we're having conversations, you're keeping it on subject matter. I think maybe with it might be a bit difficult with women. So sometimes I've noticed. So sometimes when people ask personal questions, or some people ask, okay, so one woman, this was a few years ago, said, "Oh, I don't know if maybe she was interested." And I said, "No, I've got a missus, I've got a wife, it's fine. I don't talk about it in public. I'm fine." "Oh, what's your thoughts on polygamy?" "I've got no issue with polygamy." "Would you think about taking a second foot? Have you got enough?" I was like, don't ask me any personal. I'm not going to open one question, then it's going to lead to something else. Then it's going to be like, what type of women do you like? Would you be interested in this? So I just like, I don't even entertain that, because some people are just maybe naturally nosy, but then they want to know more, and then it's just like a kind of free for all. But I find some of those conversations like hilarious, especially when it's come from people that I would have thought would know better. Um, but again, just for the actually, let me, because I noticed a few people have joined since we've been talking for a while. Just for the benefit of anyone who's joined within the last like 10 to 15 minutes, the topic of tonight's Instagram live is Cite Black Sources, where I'm speaking to the phenom, the pioneer, the village auntie, who is a certified sexual health educator, an intimacy expert, a relationship coach, the founder of the Village Auntie Institute. She has over 20 years of experience, not only in the US of A, where she resides, but also in the Middle East and Africa and Europe. She's also a storyteller. She's also an author. She's a researcher, a clinical, a marriage counselor as well. You mentioned that, a marriage counselor, a clinical profession. And she's someone who's been working not only within the Muslim community, but the wider community in the US, on a number of issues, not only from sexual health to marital issues, but also dealing with, which I don't think you maybe speak about as much, or maybe people don't recognize, sorry, your work in the realm of spirituality and womanhood, with her, I think it's a Foundation Womanhood course. But again, people, and I'll save this, and everyone, again, please check out her work, not only on social media, but also on her website, the Village Auntie Institute. I wanted to actually kind of touch on, because you're very active on social media, like doing lives and speak, and I'm someone who kind of, I see obviously your work from afar, and again, I know it's a woman's space, so I don't try to intervene, but I'm hoping you're taking some bit of a step back. I do think, especially when you're dealing with a lot of people's personal issues, it can be quite emotionally taxing. So how do you balance that, the work that you're giving, because you're a very like caring person, you want to support people, but also to kind of look after yourself and preserving your self-care? How do you achieve that balance? Or are you struggling to achieve that balance? I think that's very important.
I struggle. I've struggled a lot. And, a lot sat me down before I would sit myself down. So I do a lot of work online on social media, and then through Zoom, WhatsApp, I don't even know how many WhatsApp groups I have of students where I actively engage. Like literally, I have students all over the world. So I might get a message at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. It's somebody's afternoon lunch break, and it's my middle of the night. Um, and I love the work that I do. I love the community that I have built, but it is very taxing. And so I'm gonna be a little bit spoofy for a minute. So people can bear with me. Sometimes spiritual illness will manifest in physical reality. And as a person who is the holder and keeper of secrets for so many people, as a person that people come to when their hearts are broken or breaking or heavy, I found myself under a hospital stay because they thought I was having a heart attack. Alhamdulillah, my heart is fine, my brain is fine. You know, I don't have any like compounding illnesses, but they just could not figure out why it seemed like from all of their tests that they took initially that I was having a heart attack. But it turns out that the doctor said, whatever it is that you're doing, you need to do less of it. Like you should not be having chest pain. You should not be having all of these things. You should be okay. But it's clear that you're not okay. So whatever you're doing, you have to do less of it. So for the past couple of weeks, I haven't been doing Ask Auntie. You know, I get about 60 to 85 questions a week. And people are sending in questions on sexuality, spirituality, faith, culture, and identity. Those are the 5 pillars that I sort of talk about. And so I'm answering these questions, and then I have my book club, and I have Foundational Womanhood. We have a grad school group. We have a neurodiversity group. We have a menopause support group. We have all of these spaces. And Allah was like, guess what? You're not going to do none of it, right? And I was cut off from being able to do any of that. So for the last couple of weeks, I really pulled back and said, all right, what do I have to do? And what do I have to do to be able to continue this work? Because my heart was feeling heavy because I was holding everybody else's stuff, right? My heart was weighted down by everybody else's stuff, and that is what makes it difficult to see people steal your work to make a quick buck, because this has never been about money for me. It's been about souls and hearts and community. So I haven't done a good job of balancing it because I see it as something that Allah has put in my path to be able to help people and teach people and educate people. But I can't do that if I'm not whole. So I just, you know, I didn't announce it. I just ain't been posted. I haven't been doing like Ask Auntie. And I don't know when I'll start back up doing it regularly. I have started a Substack or restarted my Substack so I can have more long form content, write things out. I'm resisting the algorithm that says you have to post a 10 to 15-second reel. I'm resisting the, you know, you got to use a trending song and do this. If I want to, I will. If I don't, I won't. So managing social media for me now looks like remembering how I have always done this work, which is in community. So it's not posting 4 to 6 stories a day. It's not promoting this class and doing this and doing that, because I don't want to burn out, because I know that there is a need for me in this space. But I know that social media can, as helpful as it can be, it can also be a place of great toxicity, especially when people want to be intentionally obtuse, rude, negative, or violent. Then I know that it's definitely time to take a step back. So that's a very long answer to a very short question.
Allah preserve your health. I mean,
Um,
I think I mean Allah's more merciful to us than we are to ourselves, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and I think it's a blessing in disguise, like I said, for you to pause, not to stop, to pause, but not to give. I don't think you should let people know when you're going to come back in full effect. I think just take time for your body, your mind, and your soul to heal. Because I think what you said about holding so many people's secrets, that's a lot. That's a lot. Even I'm just thinking, even from an emotional standpoint. I mean, there's only few people, and with men, I think generally, unless you kind of speak to someone face to face, or I've communicated them for a bit. Men generally don't put everything out, maybe because I don't put myself out there to kind of provide that kind of level of counselling. But the few that I do receive is quite a lot to take. So for someone like yourself to be receiving, like you said, like 60 messages a week, and a lot of those I can imagine will be, really intense things that, again, because your mind will be preoccupied by what they're going through as well, especially their not only their mental but their spiritual wealth, and obviously you want to help them, but there's only so much you can carry. And I just think that you need to, for your own self, you need to not be shy to say no. I think you mentioned it even in your book, the passage about, I think you said either this year or the next year is the year of the no. I always remember you saying that on one of your and I think you just need to listen to your own advice, honestly. Not be afraid to say no to people. And again, it can be very difficult because obviously you're known as a village auntie, so people will look at you like the second mother, you're accessible. different parts of the world. And I'm not blaming the people who obviously reached out to you because they're not aware of all of the hundreds of women around the world that are reaching out to you. But I've seen so many women burn out on social media because they do too much. And it's coming from a good place because they want to help, they want to put themselves out there. And then you have to deal with, like you mentioned, people stealing your work and that's there's too much. And you've got your own personal life to deal with, well, that's offline, which is more important. So, and again, which people aren't privy to, and they don't need to be privy to that. So, I think to continue, you should continue being the expert thought leader that you are. And the way I look is that social media should be an addition. It should be something that to put the nuggets of the experience that you've got out there, because social media always changes as well. So even I don't really get on the reels and the TikTok. I don't really. I might post, but I don't get. And I'm not trying to keep up with it. There's too much because that's like a job in and of itself. So to try and compete with teenagers who've got so much free time as well. Like that's the reality. So much free time to compete with them and it's going to be too much. It's going to be and it's always changing every like 2 to 3 years, if that. So I just think that to be a social media influencer, a counselor, all of these things is too much.
And I have a
And I'm sure you got
full-time, I have a full-time job. I don't think people
yeah, so
realize
do I.
that.
I don't think people realize. And again, I don't blame the request because
No,
again they're none the wiser. And again, people they don't realize, like I said, but
true.
this is where you have to, for yourself, like either shut down social media, say no, and be consistent with this. Because we've spoken about this a number of times.
We
I
have.
remember there was a time we had a conversation, and you
Yeah.
said, "Yeah, you're gonna take a break on social media," and I saw you like within a couple of hours. I was like, I don't know, my love for you for your work. I was like, it's too much.
Yeah.
And I can see you look drained, and it's just something that I think maybe the women in your team need to kind of maybe because they probably will see people that's watching.
So
They don't see the work you're doing. They probably need to kind of I don't know maybe block your phone or do something. Take some.
So here's what I will say. Here's the difference from when we had that conversation, which I think was during the pandemic, to now. Now, alhamdulillah, I have to shout out, and I don't know if any of them are still watching, but all of the sisters of TOA, which is the Rites of Passage organization that comes out of the Foundational Womanhood program, to see them take on a mantle of leadership within the village and take responsibility off of my plate has been literally the biggest gift. So, like right now, I've not really been talking in the WhatsApp groups. I haven't really been doing a whole lot of stuff, and things are still going. I have admin in the WhatsApp groups. I have an admissions committee who is running, the administration of Foundational Womanhood. I have someone who's helped reminding me, Auntie, remember you have this this I'm going to San Francisco next week. Remember you're traveling. Is there anything we need to take care of for that? So I don't have to do everything. There are certain things that people are going to come to me for that only I can provide. And that is okay. That I can manage. But all of the other things I've been able to just really step back and people say, I got it. And that I think is also a blessing because people see me. I'm just one person, but the organization of the village is really run by just brilliant women who step up and do the work. Grace is here, mashallah. She's one of my long standing sisters, friends, students, members of the village, sister of TOA. So I do have to shout them out. And I also have to shout out, there are brothers, some of them imams, some of them shuyukh, people like you, Habib, brothers who will step in and say, like, are you taking care of yourself? Do I need to call your husband and tell him to take your phone? Or like, I have one brother, he's married to a very good friend of mine. We're all friends. Sometimes he'll just send me $50 and he'll say, you and Brother Muhammad go out to lunch or something. So, I do have to say that there are people in my community who have taken on a lot of that work, but and even with that, it's still too much. I have 4 children, I work full time, and then I'm running this whole, we literally have like an online community centered, global organization, and it is a lot. So, and you're right, I'm 48, Habib, I just had a birthday, I can't keep up with teenagers. I can't. I
Yeah,
can't.
it's a different world.
And I don't
It's a different world.
I don't think I should, and I don't know that I want to. So I've been enjoying my time just, reading, writing, and the work will be there when I'm ready to return robustly, inshallah.
Yeah. And you have the institute as well. So the institute, and that's a good thing that having that institute is part of your legacy, and the students and the leaders that you've developed and trained, they'll be they'll be doing the work that so you don't have to be everywhere for everyone. So I think
Mhm.
it's good that you already established that a few years ago anyway, but to maybe to put more effort into like having that the institute, and then people can go to the institute as a resource rather than I need to have this one-to-one relationship with the village auntie, because you shouldn't be accessible to everyone with the work that you've done. And like again, and I mentioned those names like the Esther Perels of this world, she's not accessible to everyone for a reason, because it will be too much. So it's a case of managing your time efficiently as well. So you look at a lot of those figures, those global leaders, and you're in the same company. You cannot be doing, and again, it's not coming from a place of arrogance. It's something, if you're going to be effective long term, you need to be efficient with your time and your resources, and that's why you do need to delegate. And those people that you've trained and educated, you need to push that down, and then they can maybe provide the counselling and the service to the women that maybe that want to go to you directly, but no, you've got other qualified people who you vouch for, who are under the Village Auntie Institute. They can do the work for you because you respect that, the knowledge that you pass down to them. So I think, and again, that way, then you can, when you do come out and do those with your IG lives, and have it maybe you can do it infrequently rather than doing it like every week, and then people be like, when you say how many WhatsApp groups you've got, it's just like, to me it's too much. It's too much. So please, like I said, just you have to look after yourself, because your body has a right of you. The Prophet ﷺ said, your soul has a right of you. So as much as you're thinking you need to help everyone else, you need to take care of number one, which is yourself, before even your children and even your husband and things like that. But I'm just conscious of time, and I want to talk about your intimacy pyramid. And the reason why I want to talk about it, just for the benefit, I'm not sure if you've changed it or developed it slightly, but it's something which I've referenced and use, and we'll be discussing tomorrow, because I've got um how they called it, it's an interactive workshop session with men. It's all married men. I think it's about me like 40 to 50, from different parts of the US, Muslim men, and we're going to be speaking about sex, intimacy, kunyaza, and all the good stuff. But I was looking for, not only for this one, but previously looking for like an intimacy model, because I often obviously hear women talk about intimacy and how it's not the same as sex, and a lot of women need or require intimacy, or how to teach intimacy to men, not only emotional intimacy, but other types of intimacy, which you spoke about in the model. So I use that, and what I try to do, and this is where, again, an example for anyone who's maybe listening, where you have a black source. That it's not to say that you can't quote that source, but you can use it. But then if you want to, this is how hopefully this isn't plagiarism. This is how I
No.
intend, or how I've been using it, is with the intimacy model. If I'm speaking to, and just by way of background, see, you can explain a bit more better about how I've understood it. There's 5 types of authentic intimacy: physical, emotional, experiential, intellectual, and spiritual. I'm not sure if it's in that order, but they're the 5. And I think you
Mm-hmm.
recently spoke about safety. Is that
Mm-hmm.
wrong? Have I got it
No,
wrong?
no,
Oh
you're right.
no.
You're right.
Okay, so there's five models, and then because I think you also posted recently, there was which I really liked, explaining. So you defined what those different 5 types of intimacy is, and then you had a question which is good for like a conversation starter. So I use that, and also what I do is, so if I'm speaking to if I'm doing workshops for men who are primarily like not Muslim, I might use examples in popular culture that they can kind of relate to, of
Mhm.
those different types of 5 types of intimacy. Where if I'm speaking to primarily like Muslims, like tomorrow, I'll try and give examples from like the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So I'm gonna say so, like for example, physical intimacy. We've got reports, hadiths of the Prophet's relationship with Aisha, how he used to play with her. They used to play with one each other, things like that. So that's an example of physical intimacy. And then speaking about what was the next one? Physical. I think I went to, no, I didn't go to emotional. Physical, intellectual. Then I'll use the example of the Prophet Sallallahu relationship with Salama, and how he respected her, um, her advice in the when the Prophet ﷺ, when some of the companions wasn't listening to him, then he went back to the tent and he was quite upset. And then she told him to shave off your head and then they will copy. Because sometimes people will just follow you by your actions. But this is an example where the Prophet relied on her counsel. And again, I'm just that's something we don't really kind of hear about, like where he respected her intellect and her counsel, and he acted upon it, not just I'm listening, attentively listened and acted upon it. So she gave him an insight that he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at the time, because again he was upset that the companions wasn't listening to him, and they not only did he act upon it, the right result in terms of the men then actually then realized the error of their ways, and then they follow what the Prophet ﷺ had instructed. So that's like another example. Well, that's an example like I'll use for intellectual intimacy, and then with expert, no, then I'll use emotional intimacy. Then I'll use the example of the Prophet's relationship with Sauda, who he married after Khadija passed away, and the emotional support that she's provided for him after suffering two devastating deaths with his uncle and his beloved wife, and then the emotional support that she provided for him. Then I'll use experiential intimacy to talk about the Prophet ﷺ's relationship with Khadija, where she supported him financially and her loyalty. And when he did, obviously when he became the Prophet, and then even after she died, he still remembered her. He would remember her fondly when her sister would come and things like that. So I think even that's something that men can kind of relate to, because especially men who are quite successful, one of the things that they always could be quite cynical, skeptical of women is that if you didn't know me before, maybe now you just got me for my money. And sometimes they can be very difficult for them to kind of connect with women. But a woman that they maybe had a relationship with when they didn't have nothing, I think that woman generally always holds a special place in that man's heart. So I'll kind of use Khadija as an example. And then with like spiritual intimacy, I'm going to talk about the Prophet's relationship with Maryam and Asiya, because they are going to be his wives in paradise. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned two of those women as the best amongst the best of women, and examples for us as believers, both men and women. And the fact that obviously the Prophet mentioned those two women as amongst the four best of women ever to have lived. And he's going to, so they had like a special, you could say, relationship, and you can be connected with someone like spiritually without even necessarily having any physical intimate relationship. So that's like an example of where I think it's not plagiarism, where you cite your sources. So I would use the intimacy pyramid that you've developed, and then I'll give it examples maybe for my audience. So if I'm speaking, like I said, to a Muslim audience, I'll use examples from the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. I'm speaking to non-Muslims, and I'll use examples that maybe they can relate to from popular culture. So that's, for me, an example of how you can cite black sources, cite black women, give them the credit they deserve. But then if you want to obviously put your own, it's not necessarily spin on it, but explanation for your audience, that's how you can do it. So if something like that, is that an okay way of citing or crediting?
That is perfect. I love it. That's what I want people to be able to use it for. I don't want people to say, this is what Village Auntie came up with, this is Angelica Lindsey-Ali's intimacy pyramid, and that's it. It doesn't work if it only remains a theory. It becomes inculcated into people's hearts and minds when there's application. And that's what you've done, is application. I was doing a workshop with people who were not married, and I used every one of the five intimacies, and I used Salman al-Farisi and Abu Darda to elucidate each one of the types of intimacies. So to talk about, like, this is a way of having closeness in platonic relationships. So they were brothers, not by blood, but this is how they demonstrated all of these. So that I think that's perfect. And I never worry about when you are presenting something, because you always give me that proper credit. You, and also Ifet Rafiq, Ustaza Ifet. she wanted to use the intimacy pyramid, and she's like, I want to get your permission before I use it. And it just so happened that she had one that was an older version, so I sent her a newer version. And someone sent me a message and said, oh, I went to her workshop and she used this, and I just loved it so much. So that's what we want to see. It's not like, oh, make sure you tell them it's my stuff. It's like, yeah, say this is what I got, and this is how you can apply it. This is how it applies in my work. That's I think that's perfect. So now I can say, like, I've never been to Dubai, but at least, you know, my intimacy pyramid has been there.
It
So,
has, and people know of your work. That's why I just, again, I'm close to wrapping up, but just want to, again, just for you to know, and obviously for people to know that your work is thoroughly appreciated. You are seen. You are someone who we do rely on and do respect. And we make dua for you and your family. So just again, just to continue doing what you're doing, and try as much as, yes, I know it can be quite exhausting to see those who are maybe copying your work, and but the way I look at it as well is that even if you've got counterfeits, that which is real or that which is authentic, people will see.
mhm.
I think people maybe who are quite simple-minded, or maybe you've got very a short attention span, they might not be able to differentiate. But anyone who you've got a track record, it's documented, so people will be able to see. So that's why I wouldn't really worry too much about those who are copying you. I'd be more concerned if it is someone who is imitating you by saying, I am Angelica Lindsey-Ali. For example, like if you found someone in different parts of the world that says, that's worrying, because and the reason why I'm saying it, because I've got a couple of, not me personally, I know of a couple of that's been brought to my attention, who are using my book for nefarious reasons, and they're saying that I vouched them. That's something that's where I'm kind of
Yeah,
concerned.
that's
So
not
there's someone in and he's created like a Twitter page. He's using my book as a handle, and he's saying that I'm going. And not only he's going out to people and saying I could do kunyaza on you and teach your wife, so I'll do it for your wife or your girlfriend, and you'll be watching and things like that. And I'm a close friend of a Habib. Things like that. When I was told, I reached out to the person. Obviously, I don't know who the person is because he doesn't disclose his face. But I just said, drop my name out. Can you stop using my book if you're going to be doing that? He dropped my name. He still used my. I can't stop him from using the picture because it is what it is. But things like that, that's where I'm kind of worried, because they're using your even your name or your likeness and things like that. But if it's someone who is just like they've seen something and they want to kind of remix it, I'll be honest. There's too many people that are going to do that, and it'll be very difficult to stop. And again, it'll be exhausting to kind of waste my time on looking at all of these imitators. But it's just to concentrate on the work that I'm trying to do. And again, that's the way I look at it. But I think it's important that we do credit our sources, especially like what we've spoken about today, the source of Black people, especially Black women. And the Village Auntie is one phenomenal source that, again, I definitely encourage people to not only to look up, but also to those of you who have been inspired by her work to kind of do not be shy to kind of vocalize that the same way you'd vocalize. I keep using like the five love language. Everyone likes to talk about that, but for
Mhm.
example, when it comes to our Black women, we kind of are quite shy to kind of talk about their contributions. So yeah, just is there anything? Usually I'll ask, is there anything you want to promote and stuff? But I want you to go into hibernation, so hopefully there isn't much.
No,
But is there
I,
anything? Is there anything else you wanted to say or
no.
to
Well,
talk about?
so one thing I do want to say, because I think you're there with the National Council of Nigerian Muslims. Is
Yeah.
that the conference where you are?
Yes.
So, and this is kind of off topic, but not really off topic. I've always loved the way that as a Nigerian man, you have always made me feel as an equal, as an African American woman. And that doesn't always happen in all spaces. Sometimes there is this belief amongst people that as African Americans, we are somehow deficient in our Blackness, or we're deficient in our connection to our African heritage and culture. Even before I found out through my ancestry test that I was Yoruba and my people were from what is now known as Nigeria, you've always made me feel like an equal. You've never made my gender an issue. And I just really appreciate that. I really appreciate the way that you've always made sure to elevate my work and have never been in any way condescending. You've only been supportive. You've always been like, Angelica, you need to sit down in the nicest and most halal of ways. And so I just wanted you to know, and everybody who's watching and who will watch it, just how much I appreciate that, because that does not always happen for me as a Black American woman. So I'm giving you your kudos. That's my last thought that I'm going to share.
Sorry, can we unpack that a little bit? Why is, I mean, because is that again? Forgive me if I'm sounding a bit like I should know this, but is that an issue in is there a divide in amongst African Americans and Africans in America, like in terms of like, especially amongst the Muslims, like where they look at one culture's I'm trying to understand that dynamic.
So
Do you mind expanding on that?
it's interesting because it doesn't really come from African Muslims. It'll come from, I've had some African American people say, for example, Angelica, you're teaching Kunyaza, or Angelica, you're always talking about like African culture. Your sheikh is from Senegal. You know, they don't like us. You know, they see us as less than. You know, they blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that's not the case. That's not true. And our working relationship helps to elucidate that point for people who may say that, because there are some people who have this mentality that we have to be separate. I'm a Pan-Africanist. That's always been my focus. I'm very proud to be an African American woman, but I also don't see myself as being any less than. But you have some people in some spaces who want to push that narrative, and all of our interaction has shown the exact opposite of that. So yeah, it is a thing. It can be a thing for some people.
I think, yeah, I think maybe in a way sometimes I, I don't know if I do this consciously or subconsciously. Well, although yes, I'm Nigerian, because I do not speak the language, so I'm Yoruba. Um, I've seen sometimes, like I've been made to feel sometimes as an outsider even from when I was young.
Mhm.
So I can understand and I don't like to always just promote like Yoruba culture, because then it can, give this idea that, we're somewhat superior or anything like that, which I don't believe. But I do believe that it's healthy for us, especially as Black people, as African people, people of African descent, whether you are in the UK, America, South America, in the continent itself. We've got a rich tradition and we can share and learn from each other.
Mhm.
And because there's quite a disdain towards Blackness, and again, I'm speaking Blackness and Africanness together, I mainly concentrate on the benefits that we can learn from different cultures, whether it's again African American community, South American Black people, Africans in the UK, and what have you. So that's why I try and concentrate on the positives rather than that which where there's like disagreements or people, because you have that in the UK amongst like West Africans and Caribbeans, or West Africans and East Africans. So I try and look at, because I think especially as non-black people aren't necessarily privy to like these differences. And if I'm mainly speaking about Nigerians, then I can see how someone would think, okay, you're just talking about your own culture and trying to make as if your culture is superior. And that's why I like to learn about other cultures outside of Nigeria, because that's not where I'm from, because then I can look at it from the stance of actually from a form of appreciation, but also some form of, okay, connectedness as well, kind of thing. So I personally don't like to just speak about Nigerians and Nigerian culture for maybe for that reason, because I think, yeah, if you're always talking about your culture, then you can have this level of hubris that I think some other cultures and some people do have, if they're always speaking about, their own people and what they've achieved. But at the end of the day, I think we're all the same people. So, no, but I appreciate those words. Yeah.
Same. Well, thank you, Habib.
So,
This has been good. You're the only
Jazakallah.
person that I'll get on Instagram Live and talk this log with.
Oh, apologize. Sorry.
No,
Because I know you was even
no,
supposed to
same.
start a
It's
couple earlier.
good.
It's been a few hours of your time. I do apologize.
No, it's okay.
But yeah,
It's okay.
please take the necessary rest. And again, please, everyone who is following, go and watching, so follow the Village Auntie. Don't expect to be seeing. Hopefully, you're not going to be seeing Arts the Village or Arts Auntie
No,
IG lives anytime soon. She's going to take a break. So,
I,
but she's got a lot of content on her page that you can, scroll down and check. Before I used to say, when there's all these queries I'll get, I always, push them your way. I'm not going to be doing that anymore. So I don't want to be part of the people that's, sending you these so many messages. I'll maybe direct them to your institute. So then there's a filter and your team can appropriately process those. But yeah, just please continue to do what you're doing. May Allah preserve your health and your families, both in this life and hereafter. And more importantly, preserve your iman. But yeah, please keep doing what you're doing, and we'll definitely speak soon, inshallah. And Jazakallah khairan everyone for listening. Want to save this. But yeah, thank you again to the Village Auntie for attending this IG live.
thank
Assalamu
you,
alaikum.
Habibi. Wa alaikum salam.